The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Chapter 23. The truth I learn as I approach 3 years of age, and the enemy of my enemy is an enemy. It was a clear February morning, with the smell of blood on the cool morning breeze. Oh! A deep war cry echoed out, as ghouls who were busy removing the organs from orc, goblin, and kobold corpses and preparing them for breakfast glanced at the source of the war cry in surprise. Vigaro looked up at the morning sun. Oi, hasn't Vigaro grown bigger? It can't be. He ranked up? Vigaro's body was already over 2 meters tall to begin with, and had grown a size bigger. His lion's head was more masculine, his fangs were thicker and stronger, and the muscles of his limbs had grown larger while maintaining their flexibility. His appearance was that associated with individuals that were legendary to the ghouls, individuals who hadn't existed in this devil's nest for several hundred years. Berserker! A ghoul berserker! Vigaro had been a ghoul barbarian with long years of experience as a warrior. In last night's battle, he had defeated multiple orc generals that were of the same rank as him, as well as the noble orc that was a rank higher, earning him a large quantity of experience points. At the same time, the level of his skills improved as well, so it seemed that he had met the requirements for his rank to increase. Though it wasn't as great as the legendary ghoul tyrants, the ghouls cheered and shouted Vigaro's name as they witnessed the birth of a ghoul berserker, who were said to be able to slaughter 100 human soldiers alone. 5 minutes later, Vandaloo was receiving remonstrations first thing in the morning from 3 beautiful women. Some might be jealous of him, but if one were to voice that to him, he would likely reply, "In my profession, at least, this isn't a reward." "Listen, boy, you are indeed our leader, but that does not mean you must take on the role of finishing the enemy's leader." It's true that I would have only been a hindrance in a fight against that noble orc, but you didn't have to suddenly fly out to face him on your own. If you had brought your allies and received their support from the beginning of the fight, then maybe you wouldn't have had to rely on such a dangerous plan, right? That's right. I thought I was going to faint when Sam told me what happened. Vandaloo, you are still a child who's not even 3 years old. That was going too far. Only Vandaloo could see and hear Darcia, who was scolding him the most. So Zadiris and Basdia were under the impression that only the 2 of them were remonstrating him, however. "Yes, I'm sorry." Making no excuses, Vandaloo sincerely apologized. Looking back on it, it was indeed reckless for him to charge at Bogugan on his own. There had to have been other ways. He had made Zadiris, Basdia, and most of all Darcia worry about him. As Basdia said, if they had attacked Bogugan with everyone together from the beginning and used arrows, throwing weapons, and magic attacks from a distance, while Vandaloo slowed him down, it might have been possible to render Bogugan helpless, though it would have taken some time to finish him off. This method would have worked even better if Vandaloo had applied deadly poison to the ghoul's arrows and throwing weapons too. And though it would have been difficult to prevent Bogugan from killing anyone, the risk of someone dying was probably not all that different from the risk of Vandaloo dying when he allowed Bogugan to cut through his ribs, sternum, and lungs. After having a night to calmly think about it, Vandaloo had come to realize that other methods had been available to him. And though Vandaloo hadn't been aware of it at the time, he knew that he had lost his presence of mind back then. Well, that was only natural. It was his first real battle in a long time, and it was a large-scale battle, too. Vandeleur comforted himself by telling himself this as he prepared himself for long remonstrations. But this just shows how much you care about all of the ghouls, Vandeleur, so I will overlook it just this once, but don't do that again, okay? But it's also true that we weren't strong enough for you to have confidence in us. I actually fired arrows at that noble orc, but they were all cleared away by his magic sword. That can't even be called support. I couldn't create any openings. I'm sorry, Van. I've made you do such a reckless thing because I'm still inexperienced. Indeed, and thanks to you, boy, we did not suffer even a single casualty. Because you distributed your magic items, strengthened us with your skills, transferred your magic to us, and rendered the enemy mages helpless. If you consider these things, we had been demanding the unreasonable of you from the very beginning. I apologize, boy. Huh? However, though Vandeleur had expected them to be angrier at him, Darcia quickly forgave him, while Bastia and Zadiris even apologized in return. Vandeleur was shocked, but none of them took back their words. Is that all? As Vandeleur asked this question, the three of them blinked in surprise. Yes, you do not wish to be scolded any further, do you, boy? Zadiris and the other two seemed surprised as to why he would ask this question, and Vandeleur replied without thinking, I don't, but the reprimanding I've faced up until now have been harsher and longer. In Vandeleur's past lives on Earth and in Lambda, he had never been blessed with old age. The uncle who had raised him on Earth always delivered his reprimanding with a set combo of violence and angry shouting, and since he was concerned about maintaining outward appearances, he had always waited until they came back home to do so. On top of that, he had never listened to Vandeleur's side of the story, or tried to understand why things had happened as they had. He never pointed out how Vandeleur should improve himself, other than saying, "Don't ever do that again." And even after reprimanding Vandeleur, he had never thought about how he should prevent Vandeleur from repeating his behavior. And the reason for his reprimanding was, "You parentless piece of shit. You're being a burden to me by trying to have the same luxuries as a normal person. You have to be fucking kidding me." So Vandeleur only felt anger and fear towards him. When his aunt had reprimanded him, it was just as long. She would complain endlessly in a dark tone, not making any sense as she rambled on and on. She wouldn't stop until she was satisfied or needed to do something else. The worst was when she had said, "You've made me waste so much time on scolding you," and then spent the next few hours scolding him. The teachers of his school had scolded him without putting much thought or effort into it whenever some kind of trouble occurred. Rather than trying to think about who or what had caused the trouble, it was easier for them to blame it on the boy who was always acting suspiciously and dressed in old black clothes. In fact, that was how his elementary school class had been kept in order, and Vandeleur had just assumed that this was the correct way for the school to handle things. With those lessons in his mind, he succeeded in living a peaceful middle school and high school life, being as inconspicuous as air. And then, in origin, being scolded had changed meaning to become being punished. In origin, Vandeleur had been a mere laboratory animal, and for the researchers who raised him, he was something that needed to be trained, not educated. Fists were replaced with electrical shocks, and remonstrations were replaced with words that were like knives that gouged out his lungs. Of course, they had no reason to listen to Vandelou's complaints, and the researchers always prioritized their own convenience first. Even though he obeyed all of their commands, there were times when he was punished for absurd reasons, like experiments where electricity passed through his body, leaving him convulsing on the floor to test whether his mana's properties would change if he was subjected to extreme pain. As a result of these traumatic experiences, Vandeloo had become extremely afraid of people becoming angry at him. If it was someone he didn't mind killing, someone he wanted to kill, someone he was able to kill, then that would be fine. He wasn't scared at all of fighting and killing, but he was scared of those he couldn't kill becoming angry at him and reprimanding him. Of course, he hadn't thought for a moment that Darcia, Zadiris, or Basdia would act like his uncle or those researchers, but even so, he had been terrified. Vandeloo, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for scaring you. Darcia had a rough idea about Vandeloo's past and what he had been through. She didn't have a physical body, but she wrapped her cold, spirit arms around him gently. No, it's nothing you need to apologize for, Mom. It was a trauma that he had from his previous lives. It would have been unfair to expect Darcia to make an effort to be cautious about it. She was the first mother in this world to raise a child with memories of his previous lives, so there were no examples for her to follow. However, as the other two were unaware that Vandeloo possessed memories from his previous lives, they could only make the incorrect assumption. Boy, I have never heard details regarding your mother. What kind of person was she? I mean, normally, what was she like, and how did she act when she was angry at you, Van? Their eyes were sympathetic, and their words inarticulate. Seeing this, Vandeloo realized that they were thinking his mother had abused him. No, that's not it. It wasn't my mother. This is the perfect opportunity, so I'll tell you about my circumstances. Could I call Vigaro here? Vandeloo, you don't need to worry about me. They can't see me after all. I do worry about it. You being misunderstood makes me sad as well, Mom. Vandeloo didn't want Zadiris or anyone else having the wrong impression of Darcia, and he had been planning to tell them about his circumstances anyway, so he decided to take this opportunity to tell them everything. I see. So that's what... The fact that Vandeloo possessed memories from his previous life, and the one before that, and the fact that he had lived those lives in other worlds. The fact that 100 people with abilities that surpassed common sense, abilities that Vandeloo didn't have, would be reincarnated in this world in the future. When Vandeloo told these facts to Zadiris and the others, they were surprised, and for some reason they seemed to understand. It was better than them not believing him, but Vandeloo was bewildered that they believed him so easily, so they explained why. You are a child who possesses 100 million mana and uses death attribute magic, something that has never existed before in this world. Even considering the fact that you are a Dhampir, having such unbelievable past actually makes this more believable. And you know too many things considering that you are not even 3 years old, Van. That would be the case even if Sam and the others were to teach you things. It makes sense if all of that knowledge is from your previous lives.
Yeah, it's just like those two said. I have nothing more to say to that.
Ah, now that you mention it, it makes sense to me too. Well, it is still a surprise that there will be 100 more people like you, boy. 100 people with over 100 million mana, huh? Zadiris and Basdia looked deep in thought, with grave expressions on their faces as they imagined young men and women with 100 million mana becoming adventurers or knights and mages under employment of human nations. But Vandaloo shook his head. No, I think they will have much less mana than me. What? Is that so? Yes, the reason I have this much mana is because I don't have anything else. Other than Vandaloo, Rodcart had granted the 100 reincarnated people cheat-like abilities and affinities for different attributes of magic. Vandaloo's abnormal amount of mana was compensation for his lack of those things. Rodcart had explained that Vandaloo's empty frame would store large quantities of mana, but looking at it another way, that meant the others didn't possess this empty frame. Their frames had been filled with cheat-like abilities and different attributes of magic. There was no way they would have an empty frame. Most of them would probably have slightly more than the 10,000 mana that the first-rate mages of Lambda would have. As Vandaloo said this, Zadiris and Bastia let out sighs of relief. I see. That is reassuring to hear. But still, they have cheat-like abilities, you know. I do not know what these cheat-like abilities might be, but the fact that you have 100 million mana is already beyond the bounds of common sense, boy. As Zadiris said, the mages of this world that could be called first class would have maybe slightly over 10,000 mana. Even enormous monsters who could defeat A-class or S-class adventurers that were known as superhumans might possess only 100,000 mana. 100 million mana was something that could be compared to the gods and the demon king that had existed in the Age of Gods. Is that so? Well, if I could use magic of the normal attributes, then that might be the case. But the owner of that mana, Vandaloo, still only had a weak sense of how vast it really was. He was unable to use fire attribute or earth attribute magic that was easy to make use of in battle, and since his skill with mana control was insufficient, he spent at least several thousands of mana to cast one spell. He didn't feel like he could say that his own power was very cheat-like. You know, I think that it would be all right for you to have a little more confidence in yourself, Vandaloo. I'll do my best. Leaving that aside, I think that I might cause trouble for everyone if I stay as the Ghoul King. The guys who are going to be reincarnated here have only lived in worlds where humans are the only intelligent creatures, so I don't know how they'll act. The status screen and skills of this world were systems similar to those used by games on Earth and in Origin. They might decide to slaughter all monsters in sight, like one might do in a game. No, it would be fine if they slaughtered monsters. The problem was if they decided to do the same for the races created by Vida, which were designated as monsters by the Amid Empire. That went without saying for the ghouls who weren't even considered one of the races created by Vida. And if they were Vandaloo's friends, then there was a real chance that they would enthusiastically start trampling over the ghouls indiscriminately, even the women and children. Thinking about it rationally, Vandaloo and the other 100 reincarnated people weren't on hostile terms. Rodcart's mistake and misfortune had aligned, resulting in Vandaloo's reincarnation in Origin to be unknown to the rest of them, and they had simply dealt him the finishing blow as he was in an undead state. However, after he had been finished off in Origin, Vandaloo had declared that he would slaughter them all, so he didn't know what would happen. Even if they were originally reincarnated together, if one were to be asked to be friends with someone who had shouted that he would kill them, even Vandaloo would shake his head. If Rodcart was watching Vandaloo now and knew that his desire for revenge on them had disappeared, then it would be fine, but that hope was slim. It didn't seem like that god was even keeping a proper eye on the world of Origin that we were reincarnated into. If Rodcart had been watching, he could have at least sent a message to Amemiya Hiroto and the others to save Vandaloo. Because he hadn't even done that, Vandaloo expected nothing from him. And so, Vandaloo thought that he should give up this title now that he had destroyed the noble orc's large village, but Zadiris and the others thought otherwise. That might indeed be the case, but those 100 people should be reincarnated here in the order in which they die in that world called Origin, not all at once. Is that not right? In that case, then we are talking about something that will not happen for a long while, and each time they appear, they should not appear in large numbers. Am I wrong? When Vandaloo had been killed in Origin, they had looked to be in their early 20s, but they had been dispatched to exterminate an undead that had appeared in the military nation's secret laboratory. They seemed to have been doing some dangerous work. So there was a chance that there were some who had made a mistake in their work and died half a year or a year after Vandaloo had. However, they had the protection of their affinity for different attributes of magic, good fortunes and destinies, as well as their cheat-like abilities. All of the things that Vandaloo had not received. They wouldn't die so easily. And because of the magic that hadn't existed on Earth, science in Origin seemed to have been more advanced than on Earth. So, unless they were killed or afflicted by some serious illness, such as cancer, they would live in Origin up until they were in their 80s, or possibly even until they were over 100 years old. Indeed, it was still some time away, and it was difficult to imagine that there would be multiple people dying simultaneously. And there is nothing to suggest that all of those 100 people will be reborn in the Amid Empire and its nations. It could be that they are reborn in the country that you are intending to go to, beyond the mountain range, or even on another continent. There is no guarantee that they will be born to human parents. They could be born from the wombs of us ghouls, or one of the other races created by Vita. Well, that might be the case, but what Zadiris was saying was reasonable, so Vandaloo had no response. And then Basdia dealt the final blow. And there are plenty of enemies that are threats to us other than those 100 people. If the humans were to dispatch B-class and A-class adventurers into this devil's nest, we could be destroyed. A high-rank monster from another devil's nest might come here and build its power, just like that noble orc. Those 100 people being reincarnated here doesn't give us a reason to be separated from you, Vandaloo. It was as Basdia said. The ghouls were the most powerful in this devil's nest, but if the Merg nation seriously dispatched high-class adventurers, they wouldn't even be able to put up a fight. And if you weren't here, I don't know if we would have been able to win the battle against the orcs. Even if we did, we would still be unable to have babies, and we wouldn't be able to maintain the village. It doesn't make sense to run away because you're scared of something that's going to happen decades from now. Well, that might be the case too, but this was reasonable too. So Vandaloo could not strongly deny it or make any points against it. For the ghouls, things that threatened their existence naturally existed, so it was the obvious choice to fight to survive the threats rather than try to avoid them, prepare for them rather than live in fear of them. And if you left us and then those 100 people started hunting down monsters anyway, I think it would end up the same regardless. Considering that, it would be more reassuring to have you around, Van. I hadn't thought of that. Vandaloo was rendered speechless in surprise. The truth was that there was a high possibility of the reincarnated people hunting monsters on a large scale, even if Vandaloo was not involved with them. After all, they were strong people, and in the world of Lambda, monsters were evil. They would very likely hunt monsters to satisfy their sense of justice, or simply to quickly gain money and fame. Vandaloo was in shock, but surprisingly it was Vigaro whose decisive opinion changed Vandaloo's mind.
I'm sure those guys are not even that strong to begin with, Vandaloo.
Vigaro's words left Vandaloo dumbfounded. They would surely be strong. They would have power beyond all reason. They would be so strong that one would think it unfair. Those 100 people, not even strong? Of course they're going to be strong. Definitely far stronger than me.
But they can die, right? Then you will be able to kill them.
Vigaro said this as if it was obvious, and Vandaloo reflexively began to object. There's no way that... Ah! And then he suddenly realized. That's right. They could definitely die. Rodcart had granted those 100 people cheat-like abilities, with the exception of Vandaloo. He protected them with good fortune. He guided them with a destiny. However, Rodcart's goal was to use these people who had died on Earth to develop the world of Lambda. The only reason he had reincarnated them in Origin first was to have them gain experience. Things had been set up so that they would be reincarnated in Lambda as they died in Origin. It would be a problem if they couldn't die. If they didn't die in Origin, they would never be sent to Lambda. Therefore, among the cheat-like abilities granted to them by Rodcart, there would be none that absolutely prevented them from dying or being killed. They might possess cheat-like abilities that granted them tremendous offensive abilities, but if their defensive abilities were normal, they could be killed. They might be able to move at ultra-high speeds, but they would die if made ill by the incurable disease spell. They might have rapid regeneration abilities that would let them regrow severed limbs, but if their brains and hearts were destroyed simultaneously, then they would die. They might have ultimate defensive abilities, but if afflicted with aging, they would die of old age. None of these methods would be simple. It would be difficult. Lives would have to be put on the line in these battles. But Vandaloo was a death attribute mage. He was someone who could freely use magic to bring about death or keep it at a distance. As long as his enemies were living beings that would eventually die one day, there would definitely be a way for Vandaloo to kill them, and he should have a means to accomplish that. I wonder why I hadn't realized such a basic thing until now. It's only natural to fear those who have what you do not have.
And they killed you once, didn't they? I can't blame you for thinking that you can't win against them.
Vandaloo fell to his knees as Zadiris and Vigaro correctly guessed the reasons he had feared those 100 people so much. I've been thinking about it since I was born, for almost 3 years, but I never thought of that. Because you pointed it out, I have more hope for the future. Thank you.
It helps us to be allies with you. Don't worry about it.
Vigaro bared his fangs that were larger than they had been yesterday in a smile, looking as if he'd be satisfied as long as Vandaloo didn't bring up the idea of giving up the title of king again.
Well, we might be a hindrance for you when you're trying to become an adventurer and a nobleman.
When that time comes, I'll tell people that I have tamed you. If that doesn't work, I'll pile up so many achievements that they can't ignore me. Oh, you've broken free, Van. Even he could kill those with cheat-like abilities. As Vandaloo made this realization, his worries in life had been cut in half, and his head felt clearer. He still aimed to kill enemies like High Priest Gordon and Hines, and he was confident that if he became stronger, he would be able to do it. Leaving Earth and Origin aside, he had skills in this world, and even possessed 100 million mana. If he could master using this mana, his revenge and killing the cheaters would be possible. There were steep mountains and valleys ahead of him in life, but he felt as if they had become a little less steep. Feeling refreshed, Vandaloo remembered something that he had meant to say once the sun rose, but hadn't said yet. "Ah, I just remembered. The humans had been making preparations to exterminate the orc village, and now that they've found out we've already done it, what shall we do?" "Boy, that is the more pressing concern." It seemed the meeting would continue for some time. Luciliano was pale and feeling strained in the morning. "This is the end of my report." He was on his knees delivering a report to his employer, the mustached nobleman Berno Balchese, and a row of knights. And there was a middle-aged man with a medium build in the prime years of his life sitting at the head of the table. Though Luciliano wasn't specialized in combat, he was an adventurer who had completed numerous requests from noblemen over the years. This man wasn't the kind of person whose presence should cause an adventurer like Luciliano to be feeling nervous. However, every time Luciliano stood before him, he felt his spine grow cold and experienced an unpleasant feeling of tension. "That report is the truth, I presume?" "Yes, Marshal Palpapek." The man's name was Marshal Thomas Palpapek. He held the court rank of Earl, but that was the rank he was given because this country of Murg was a nation of the Amid Empire. In the Empire, the title of Marquis was only held by royal family members of the Empire's nations. He was a capable marshal whose abilities and achievements were so great that if Murg were an independent nation instead of being part of the Empire, it would not have been surprising for him to hold the rank of Marquis or even Duke. Translator's note: the rank of Earl is below the rank of Marquis. Palpapek is only an earl because the position above that, Marquis, is reserved for royal family members. Duke is above the rank of Marquis. Since he had risen to this position, the Murg nation had withstood attacks from the Orbom kingdom. Public order had been improved and worked with adventurers to be involved in dealing with multiple large incidents in which monsters began overflowing from devil's nests. "I see. The noble orcs have been annihilated, and their subordinates have been scattered. This is extraordinarily delightful news, is it not, Marshal Dono?" Viscount Balchese looked truly happy as he smiled at Marshal Palpapek. It somehow seemed that even his prided handlebar mustache had become shinier. He was feeling relieved as there no longer seemed to be a need to spend large amounts of taxes to hire adventurers and dispatch soldiers and knights as an extermination force, causing casualties in the process. There was a strong stereotype of noblemen treating those serving under them as being disposable, but the ones who did that without hesitation were fools. Those with some ability as noblemen avoided casualties where possible. Soldiers were needed to maintain the peace of a region, and if some of them died, they could not always be replaced immediately. It was different from temporarily hired soldiers and guards, who only needed to be provided with equipment. One should desire a certain level of skill and loyalty from regular soldiers. This was especially true for knights whose families served noblemen for generations. If noblemen put the lives of knights to waste, they would be disgraced and lose favor from the knights' families who would choose other masters. Losses should be kept low, even for soldiers recruited from the lower class populace. If the young people that were the able workers of society were to die in large numbers, the productivity of the region would fall, and severe economic problems would develop. And there was nothing good about causing dissatisfaction among the people. Adventurers were a special case, as they worked in their occupation at their own risk. Even if 10 or 20 of them were lost, a town as large as Viscount Balchese's wouldn't be negatively affected at all. Hundreds of adventurers died every year in the nation of Murg alone. Nobody would claim that this was the responsibility of the rulers. But this only applied on a national level. If a large number of adventurers in one region were to suddenly decrease in number by too much, their monster numbers in devil's nests would be less regulated, and the materials that adventurers obtained from monsters would become scarcer. There would be consequences for anti-monster measures as well as economic consequences. And since the adventurers were essentially wanderers, if there were rumors that a nobleman was forcing adventurers to accept unreasonable requests, they could simply turn away from that nobleman. That would cause long-term difficulties for the region. Therefore, it was best to eliminate or at least reduce casualties. Of course, there were some things that needed to be done, even if casualties were certain to occur. Exterminating a noble orc's group of 500 monsters that was planning to attack the town, for instance. The group of monsters was gone, eliminating the need to form an extermination force. This could only be a good thing for Viscount Balchese. He wasn't interested in things like having the honor of exterminating powerful monsters. However, it seemed that Marshal Palpapek thought differently. That cannot be said, Viscount Balchese. Perhaps we should increase the size of the extermination force. No, more importantly, perhaps I should ask High Priest Gordon for his assistance in killing this vampire. What? How can that be, Marshal? The noble orcs have already been killed. The danger has passed. The danger has not passed. It has simply changed. From orcs to ghouls. A group of ghouls that won a battle against a group of 500 monsters led by a noble orc. Though Luciliano has not confirmed this, there are likely ghoul mages. There is even a chance that there are high-class ones, like high mages or berserkers. Or would you suggest that a group of monsters is not a threat? Marshal Palpapek was right. For humans, orcs and ghouls were both monsters. The only difference were that the ghouls had females, so they didn't need to abduct human women so frequently, and they didn't often come out of the devil's nests. But these differences were enough for Viscount Balchese's knights to disagree. But, Marshal, there have never been any confirmed cases of ghouls acting outside devil's nests, let alone in a group. Is it not safe to assume the ghouls will not come out of the devil's nest? In particular, the ghouls of that devil's nest do not even fight adventurers. They are relatively docile. As the adventurer there reported, the monsters led by the noble orc were using the female ghouls as mothers, were they not? Is this incident not simply the ghouls taking revenge on the orcs? The ghouls that had the power to defeat the noble orcs and their subordinates were indeed threatening. However, it wasn't anything more than a struggle for existence that had occurred within the devil's nest. The conflict would not spread outside. Why was there any need to take the effort to enter that conflict in a place that couldn't even be seen from here? Even Marshal Palpapek nodded, knowing that there was some truth to this argument. Indeed, if it is the ghouls that have been there for a long time, that would be the case. However, has there ever been a group of ghouls with a Dampier child among them? However, in response to this question, Viscount Balchese and his knights could only say that they had never heard of such a thing. And, considering the situation, it is highly likely that this Dampier is the Ghoul King. Is that right? Yes, considering the situation, I cannot deny the possibility of the Dampier being the Ghoul King Vandaloo. Luciliano, who had remained silent up until now, offered his thoughts with a tone that implied he would not take responsibility if he was incorrect. The ghouls had said that Vandaloo was coming, and then the Dampier child had appeared. If one considered this, it would be reasonably deduced that the child was the one called Vandaloo, and the other ghouls had said that Vandaloo was the Ghoul King. In that case, then the Ghoul King was a Dampier child by the name of Vandaloo. Even though he was a Dampier, it was difficult to believe an infant that could not even be called a boy yet was the king that led a pack of ghouls. But there was no basis for anyone to deny this possibility. And on top of that, Marshal Palpapek shared a piece of shocking information. Actually, I have a good idea of just who this Dampier named Vandaloo is. What? Is that true, Marshal? It seemed that even the knights serving Marshal Palpapek were hearing this for the first time. They were murmuring along with Viscount Balchese and his knights. Even Luciliano raised his face in surprise. About 3 years ago, I'm sure even Viscount Balchese remembers the wanted posters of a dark elf who had succumbed to a vampire's temptation circulating around our country. That dark elf's name was Darcia, and I had my own subordinates investigating the matter just in case. And in the process, I learned that the name of the vampire who seduced her is Valen. It is not unusual for parents to use parts of their own name to name their child. The son of Valen and Darcia, Vandaloo. Many commoners named their children this way. But wasn't that Dampier returned to the dirt? No, I believe the only one that was certainly executed was his dark elf mother. I heard that the corpse of the Dampier child, who was of breastfeeding age, was never found in the end. How irresponsible! Do those of the church demand such extravagant donations for such crude work? However, even being half vampire, there was no way for an infant of breastfeeding age to survive without its mother. Could the name not be a mere coincidence? But even the age matches. Is it not too much to be called a coincidence? The knights offered their own confused guesses, and they were silenced by Marshal Palpapek's powerful voice. What we should fear is the Dampier Vandaloo, who is the Ghoul King, is not content with the merely surviving and is sharpening his fangs for revenge. What will happen then? It does not even need to be said. The knights' expressions all hardened as they closed their mouths. Viscount Balchese's face had turned particularly pale. A powerful ghoul army led by a Dampier who harbored resentment towards the humans. No matter how one looked at it, this was a larger threat than the noble orcs group of monsters. Orcs were unintelligent, and even if they were led by a higher race, their coordination was sloppy, and there would be many openings to take advantage of. However, ghouls were far more intelligent than orcs, and they were a race that was even more proficient at fighting in coordination with each other than kobolds. And unlike orcs, among whom only superior individuals could use magic, most female ghouls were capable of casting spells. Their reproductive capabilities were far inferior to those of orcs, but for the noblemen and knights gathered here, that was irrelevant information. Since the ghouls had defeated a group of over 500 orcs, the noblemen had deduced that their numbers would be around the same, or at least 400. Though in reality the number of effective combatants was only around 200, including Vandaloo himself and the undead that obeyed his command. When that large army came attacking, its fangs would first be bared at this town that was close to the Devil's Nest. Nobody could blame the ruler of that town, Viscount Belchese, for looking as if he could faint at any moment. Marshal, please grant me your assistance. Of course, Viscount Belchese. Let us immediately organize a larger extermination force and eradicate those ghouls and that dampier from that devil's nest. Marshal Palpapek had managed to secure the organization of a larger extermination force while still having it done under the request of the local ruler. If this operation succeeded and he managed to exterminate the dampier that had escaped High Priest Gordon, who was renowned as a vampire hunter, his fame would increase even further. Rather than try to keep guessing at the politics beneath the surface, I must get out of here. Luciliano did not want to see that dampier's face again. Thinking about that, he continued to wait for his employer to grant him permission to leave.